actually going to be doing a review of one of the new-ish amps that Marshall's put out. But before we get started, first off, I'm B. Riley, right there. And you can find me on Instagram if you want to read lots of boring stories or just look at pictures of cool guitars or whatever it is that I'm checking up on. If you want to check up on whatever it is that I'm doing during the week. So what we're going to actually be talking about today is we're going to be talking about Marshall Origin 50 head and cabinet. Now, I'm not using the Origin 50 cabinet per se. I'm actually using the MG412A that Marshall had for their MG series amps a couple of years ago. But the MG412A and the Origin 50 are extremely similar in their dimensions and have a lot of the same tonality. Let's talk about the Origin 50. Everybody has chased a Marshall at one point or another in their life. Me personally, I was a Fender guy for a long time. I was using a Bandmaster for a long time on top of a Marshall cab. I was using Voxes for a while, and just of late, I had actually been using Bonzer amplifiers for almost everything from studio to live performance. But for this particular review, we're just going to be talking about an amp that maybe you guys are actually looking into and whether or not it is worth the effort and the time to go ahead and pick it up. That being said, we'll get into the quality of it right now, and we'll talk about what it does well, and we'll talk about maybe what it needs work on. So to start off with, this amp's got a ton of headroom. When I was a teenager, 50 watts wasn't enough. I don't know what we were doing different. Maybe because people weren't really miking up too much back then, especially when you're in high school and you're playing talent shows and piddly little things like that. No offense, if you're doing talent shows, good on you. That's a tough crowd. That being said, it has got plenty of headroom. This will, on its highest setting, damage your ears. So Marshall guys are gonna love that. And twin reverb guys as well. It does have all the headroom you need. 50 watts is more than enough. Anything higher than that, and you must be playing stadiums, and in that case, they have microphones. So that is always a huge takeaway from there. This is a problem that I've had in the past. I use a lot of pedals, and I use a lot of different fuzz pedals and distortions. I combine them at different stages to kind of create stuttering in fuzz tones or breaks in the notes, just something to kind of make it stick out of the mix just enough to give my particular type of playing its favorite tone. But I have run out of headroom in the past for the last 20 years with certain stuff, especially with pedals, back in the days before we knew what it meant to say a pedal platform. The tone is dynamite. It is really, really good. It is a nice subtle tone. It kind of rolls up into the mids. The sustain is definitely aided by that particular tone. I usually go for a darker tone, but it can do bright tones as well. It's also got a push-pull on the gain, which is kind of nice. So if you are playing live or you're playing in the studio and you want to nudge the tonality into a more driven state, but without changing your volume, you can do that by just pulling on the gain. Now, the tone does have one small issue. It sounds like itself, and it sounds like itself all the time. In a world where modeling amps are starting to become a little bit more comfortable on stage and having presets where you can digitally, conjure tones that maybe are not so common anymore, this guy isn't that. This is a set it and forget it, get your tone out of it, and kind of run through it that way. You can use pedals to push it around, and luckily enough, it is very welcoming to pedals, and I'm going to show you guys a clip right now that will actually show you me playing my Cassidy Donahue Fuzz, who's an independent maker out in Brooklyn, and you could probably find him, and if you're in New York, you probably already have. But he actually made me the fuzz pedal that I'm using in these clips. But yeah, no, the tone is really good. I forgot what I was going to say next. That happens. So the price. Now here's the deal. When you are actually standing back and looking at this half stack, it really does look worth the money. Unlike Vox, when we were doing the AC30C2s, which usually had Tolex issues where they would start to loosen up around the extreme corners and start to fold away, this one has been done really, really well. Marshall was kind enough to wrap it in Tolex that wasn't going to fall off. The front panel is very nicely laid out. It's simple, but it's not Spartan. It doesn't look too vast. It doesn't have tons of facial space with one knob on it, which is always kind of a little unusual looking, or maybe it just feels a little bit confining, which is nice. To be brutally honest, actually, I am not going to be able to find a lot to fault this guy on. When it really shakes out, it comes down to this, that every product has a worth and it is contingent upon its usage. When it comes to being that cheap as an amp, if it's working properly and giving you a tone you want, that's pretty hard to argue with. Now, I've heard a lot of purists sit there and say, hey, we do not have hand-wired Class A point-to-point, interface on this. We do not have all the robust quality parts that might be coming out of the British manufacturing facility versus the Vietnamese manufacturing facility. But here's the thing, there's a lot of new philosophies going on with amps. There are a lot of walls that have been kind of broken apart. I remember when Line 6 was putting out Spider amps and people detested them, not because they sounded bad, but just because A, they were twitchy as hell, and B, they were modeling amps. But over the last 2 or 3 years, we've really started to see that type of stigma get thrown out. And there are a lot of guitar players now and a lot of musicians that are simply accepting the fact that if something sounds good, it's good, because it is simply there to create the sound. So for me personally, it sounds the way it should sound, it looks the way it should look. It definitely costs what I would like it to cost versus what I think it should cost. The reason that this costs as little as it does is because they're making a lot of them. The reason that this costs as little as it does is because they're making it in a foreign market. And the reason that these might not be worth a lot of money a few years down the road is because there's just going to be a ton of them. And if somebody doesn't want to pay what you're charging, they'll just pay what the guy down the street is charging for a used unit. Now, that's not to say that it's a bad amp. That's not to say that it won't eventually gain in value, but it is going to take some time. So if you are actually looking for an investment opportunity amp, this isn't your guy. If you are looking for something that works really well, sounds great, looks the business, and you don't really have to sweat if you loan it to somebody and maybe it comes back with a scuff or two on it, then this is definitely your guy. But as far as a more instantaneous investment value, I would swing for the Studio 20. It takes care of one big problem. And the problem that this has, the gripe that I would put directly to Marshall is this. It's not quiet enough. Now I know what you're saying, you bought a half stack. How quiet did you expect it to be? Well, the only thing is that we are living in the brave new world of switchable wattages. And this one is no different. I can get over here and flip this switch and go from an extremely low rating, which I think is probably supposed to be approximately 5 watts, down to a 25 and down to a 50. Now when you've got this thing on high, it is loud, properly loud, all the volume you need. But the only problem is that when Marshall actually went ahead and put this together, and they set it for the low setting, I feel personally that they could have changed the wattage a little bit more, maybe got it down to about half a watt or a watt, the way that the new Fender Tone Masters do, versus say a 5 or a 10 watt. Because 5 or 10 watts in a living room or in a bedroom is actually pretty darn loud, and your neighbors are definitely going to become astutely familiar with your set. But if they could get it down to about 1 or 2 watts, where the amp would be at about 12 o'clock on a volume setting, maybe 12 o'clock across the boards on all the knobs, and you could still sit comfortably in a living room or a bedroom and play it, then that would be great. Because to tell you the truth, if you were taking it into a recording studio, you don't need that kind of volume suppression. They have ISO cabs, they have ISO closets, they can stick your amp in a closet and wrap it in a blanket or throw a blanket over it and try to muffle it. If they were building it with the intent of creating a home-friendly half stack, which is a pretty awesome thing and something I've been waiting for many, many years for without having to buy a power break and a attenuator and all that sort of stuff, then they might have missed the target ever so slightly. So Marshall, you did an awesome job at creating a really, really pretty amp. It sounds good and it's an excellent value, but maybe next time you might want to start looking at decibel ratings a little bit more closely. Is when it all shakes out, Once again, it's not whether or not the product is good or bad. The question is this: whether or not the product is good or bad for what you intend to use it for. So take it for as many grains of salt as you wish. I'm B. Riley. This is the Marshall Origin 50 head and cabinet, MG412A. So listen in. Hopefully you guys enjoy the music. Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful, beautiful day. It's sunny out. Go outside, ride a bike or something like that. Or even better than all that, stop this video, turn off YouTube, get out your guitar, and start making a bunch of racket. So this way your neighbors can get pissed and you can continue to develop as a guitar player. Because that's what I definitely need to do.